What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Mets Central Podcast, episode 69. Yes, the sex number, everyone. Let's go. But yeah, episode 69, the Mets split a four-game series with Atlanta. Started off very bad. Looked like they were going to continue their losing ways as the past 2 weeks have just been absolutely terrible. They got back on track a bit with some wins at the end of the series, which there's some positives, there's some negatives, of course, even though they won some of those games with a couple injuries, unfortunately, one major injury. And then on top of that, just of course, the way that this team has been producing offensively. Before we jump into everything, I ask that you please leave a like on your way into the show, or if you are watching on replay, subscribe if you guys are new to the channel, especially if you're Met fans, and turn on your post notifications so you know when we upload or go live. We will get to your comments, questions, and everything in the chat. We are not ignoring you. And I do want to quickly thank Carson for filling in for our show last week. Unfortunately, we were not able to get a show up for you guys. A very busy week with hockey right now made things a little bit more difficult. So that's unfortunately what it's going to be. And tonight's post games not going to be any easier. But either way, we will do our best to get you guys the content that you guys need. So thank you again to Carson for filling in for us. But yeah, actually, as we're going live here, they just announced that
Yeah.
Canning is going on the 60-day IL with a ruptured Achilles. Blade Tidwell's the corresponding move. And then Jared Young was optioned today for Mark Vientos, which I'm very thankful for because I was scared it was going to be one of Mauricio, who started to play better, or Jankowski, who I value more because of his defense. So I guess we'll just start with that before anything. And then another move actually that happened is, although I don't know what the corresponding move is here, that Colin Pouchet was called up
He was
as
called up.
well.
Okay.
So I don't know what the move is. Oh, they put up a second page. All right, that's how many roster moves. Austin Warren
Warren.
was
Yeah.
optioned, and then um, Lovelady's been optioned to Syracuse after being DFA'd, and then Jose Azocar is back on a minor league deal, which, gotta be honest, I hope not to see him after the way he was running the bases early in the year. But Matt, I'll let you jump in because I've yapped too much. Um, Very chaotic stuff going on in Mets land right now.
Yeah, I mean, like, first of all, just before I get into it, like you said, thank you to Carson for covering our show. We just couldn't, you know, get together and, make a move because, like you said, I know what the hockey world is crazy, and I don't really want to talk about the hockey world right now, considering, I'm gonna have to wear my black beanie pretty soon because things are not going well for us in that aspect. But that we'll have another time to talk about that. But yeah, as of right now for the Mets, listen, it was the last couple weeks haven't been pretty, to say that, to put that nicely, but they had a decent bounce back. I mean, look, the first two games they lost to the Braves, they weren't, pretty games. Obviously, starting with that first game, they held the Braves in check pretty much, in terms of offensively. They just themselves couldn't come through with runs. Obviously, they had the late chance later in the eighth inning, and Juan Soto unfortunately just couldn't come through with bringing in the tying run in the bottom of the eighth, and they ended up losing that game. Then you go to the second game of the series where the Mets pretty much for most of the game have the lead up until Frankie Montas, came out of the game, and obviously we'll talk about Frankie Montas a little bit more. We talked a little bit about his pitching outing on the post game that we did today or a couple nights ago, and then the bullpen comes in and just imploded. Brazaban just didn't have it, walked the bases loaded, and when you walk the bases loaded, you're asking for trouble, especially against that Atlanta Braves lineup, and they ended up losing that game. But then thankfully, you look at the final two games of the series, and pretty much it seemed like the luck turned around. And hopefully this is not just a short-term luck. Hopefully, the luck starts to, come around for the Mets now a little bit more. But it seemed like after Jeff McNeil robbed Marcell Ozuna of that two-run home run in the first inning of that third game, it seemed like the luck started to go in terms of the Mets way a bit more. Obviously, the fourth game there was an unfortunate injury that happened. But yeah, I mean, listen, solid game in that third game. You got decent pitching. Obviously, you look at Juan Soto. He came through with two home runs in that game. He had a really good game, and then the fourth game, like you talked about, Griffin Canning. It's unfortunate. It's baseball. Injuries happen, and it sucks again because that's not even a play where Canning was involved. Like he wasn't even going to field the ball. He was just simply trying to get out of the way, get off the mound, to let a clear path for the fielder to go get the baseball. But it is what it is. He ruptured his Achilles. And listen, for the Mets, I know we talked about it. The pitching depth is already stretched out. Obviously Montas made his return. Hopefully Manaea, even though there was a little bit of a scare with Manaea, but looks like he's back on track. So he should be back by next week. And yeah, I mean, listen, the pitching depth is stretched out, and it sucks to lose another pitcher. And like I said, for Canning, who's had a pretty good this year. Obviously, his last couple starts, he did get roughed up a little bit, but you know, looking at it last night, he was pitching pretty well. And then, like I said, just and again, it's like you talked about. It's unfortunate for him just because it looked like with the season he was having, it looked like going into free agency, he would have gotten a multi-year deal for decent amount of money to be a back-end starter somewhere else. And now with him going down with the season-ending injury, that looks like it's not going to happen. Probably he'll end up having to take another 1-year deal. Maybe the Mets do bring him back next year for another 1-year deal to for him to try and prove himself again. I wouldn't be too opposed to that. Obviously, we're gonna have to see with how the rotation lines up going to next year, but that's off-season talk. We're still far away from that. But yeah, it sucks for him. I feel bad, but for the Mets sake, you just got to deal with it. You got to deal with it. It's the ups and downs of the seasons. It's the unfortunate, freaks of injury thing. And yeah, and now there's pretty much just, I mean, they needed a starting pitcher already, but now it's like, it's definite. When they get to the trade deadline, they're going to have to trade for another starting pitcher. That's not even a debate because, you don't want to go down the stretch with Paul Blackburn as one of your, 5-6 guys in your rotation. You don't want to do that. And there's even a case where he probably shouldn't even be on the roster, but that's a whole nother debate. But yeah, let's get into this episode.
Yeah, Paul Blackburn, I don't think could be here beyond the trade deadline if this team is serious about contending going forward. You cannot have a guy that is actively giving you just piss poor innings every single time that he goes out there. But yeah, the Canning thing, like I said in my post game yesterday, there's no good way for it to happen, but it really just sucks that it happened with the way that it did. Like, if it was at least on a ground ball, you'd be like, he went out there and tried to field a ground ball and everything. Again, not that there's a fun way for it to be done, but it just really sucks even more that it was just him getting out of the way, and that's how it happened. It's similar to Senga last year. Thankfully, they avoided that with him, but just Senga getting out of the way on a fly ball, and then he ends up getting hurt just trying to run out of the play. So, yeah, all I could say is just kind of repeating your thoughts. They got to get a starting pitcher come the trade deadline, and it sucks that this rotation, it seemed like, was finally about to be healthy, where you're going to get Manaea back, even though we got the scare, like you said. Montas just came back and gave a pretty good start in his first one back. We'll see how he builds on that. And then, even though Holmes has been fatigued, like you were finally starting to see this rotation formulate into what it was going to be. And then Senga was going to come back in a couple of weeks, probably after the All-Star break. And now, of course, you lose yet another one of your starting pitchers. It stinks. It really does. And again, like I said yesterday in the post game, Canning has not been pitching the best lately, but he was going out there and still giving the team a chance to win the ball game more times than not, despite his struggles as of lately, outside of like a few starts here and there where he allowed 5-6 runs. But for the most part, and then even in that start, it looked like he was finally getting back on track. I thought he looked like the Canning that we saw in April and May. And then all of a sudden that has to happen. And it really is a huge blow for this team that is already starving for innings. It has a tax bullpen, which, we'll get into more of that, considering up and down. It's just like every day there's a roster transaction with this team to get fresh arms up here, because they're constantly using the guys that they call up in bulk innings, and then they have to go because they got to get fresh arms here. Because on top of the bulk innings they're getting, they're still taxing the rest of the bullpen because these starters are not going deep enough in the games, or the unfortunate event of yesterday. There are at least some positives with the way the bullpen pitched in last night's game, and then even in part of the I shouldn't even say in part. They pitched well outside of Pintaro, who made his major league debut in that third game. So at least there's some positives there with the bullpen, but there's still so much work that needs to be done with this pitching staff going forward. Um, yeah, it just absolutely stinks to lose a lot of innings that you were getting from Canning, and I guess now it makes it at least a little bit apparent that once Manai is ready to come back, he probably takes Canning's spot in the rotation because Mania needed one more rehab start. I believe the Mets have an off day somewhat soon, so they might have to use a spot starter for Canning's
Yeah,
next.
after this upcoming series in Pittsburgh, they have an off day on Monday.
Yeah, so they could just move the rotation around then. Um, yeah, I guess what they would do is, we'll get into the rundown of that later, but I guess they would move up whoever was supposed to pitch that Wednesday game against Milwaukee would probably get moved up to Tuesday, if I had to guess, and then they'd go with the rotation there, and then maybe Mania gets that Sunday game against the Yankees just to give him a little bit of extra time to fully recover. But we'll see. All I know is that, like you said, they got to get starting help come the trade deadline because I like Blade Tidwell, but probably not probably not reliable enough down the stretch unless he shows it. Let's prove me wrong. I would love to see Blade Tidwell go out there and perform, but he's still so young and still so new to the league where I don't know if you're going to be able to rely on him down the stretch enough.
Yeah, I mean, look, for Blade Tidwell, this is an opportunity. An opportunity has opened up where you have a chance to prove yourself. We've kind of seen from Stearns so far in his short time being the president of baseball operations here, where he does want to develop these young pitchers. He does want to push them along, but he doesn't want to do it at a rapid rate. He is a little bit hesitant with calling up some of these guys a bit too quickly. And again, I agree with that because with pitchers, it takes a little bit more time for them to develop, and you want to season them properly. And you don't want to just throw them up to the major leagues right away, because then if they have a couple bad starts, that knocks their confidence, and then they go back down, and then you really have to see how they recover from that. So listen, while I would like to see guys like Spro and a couple other guys come up here from AAA and pitch, I do also see the benefit of leaving them down in AAA, letting them develop, let them get extra seasoned, and then we'll go from there. There'll be spots opened up in the rotation next year, so maybe those guys take one of the opportunities next year. Guys like McLean, Sproat, like I mentioned. I mean, Jonah Tong is still for me a couple years away, but concerning his success right now in Double-A, and he's striking out like a ton of batters down there in Double-A, so he's looking like an exciting prospect. But yeah, like I said, for Tidwell, it's an opportunity for him to go out there and show what he's got. I mean, listen, so far from his 2 starts, and again, small sample size, so you really can't take too much out of those starts. I mean, the first one in St. Louis wasn't great. His whole command, he had some command issues in that start. And with that one, like, I kind of give him the benefit of the doubt just because, again, it's your major league debut, kind of a little bit nervous. But then, I mean, his last start that he had in Philly, even though he came out a little bit early, I believe he came out after 2 or 3 2/3 or 3 1/3. But he showed some decent flashes in that outing. He got some swings and misses. I really liked his fastball. I thought, he had some really good life and some good velo on that fastball. The only thing for me with Tidwell, and again, for him to succeed in the major leagues, he's going to have to work a bit on his breaking pitches, because there's times where, he'll get into some trouble, and instead of, relying on his fastball, which he's shown so far in a short time that he can generate swings and misses, he'll kind of go to the breaking stuff, and his breaking stuff is not yet refined to the point where he can kind of like, pinpoint it on perfect corners against swings and misses. So he is a little bit wild with that slider, but again, still young. He's still going to develop. So I'm not too worried about that, but, and especially for him now, since he's going to get an opportunity, he kind of does have to, refine those things on the fly a little bit. So I'm interested to see, how he's going to look like. I mean, so far, I think right now he's going to be in the bullpen. So, he'll come into games, if the Mets need a long man. And if there is a couple times where the Mets are going to need a 6 starter, he's going to be the guy to be called upon to start those games. So for Blake Tidwell, I would, like, if I was Mendoza, I'd say, listen, this is your opportunity, kid. Go show what you got, because we know the kid has some level of talent.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Stearns did in Milwaukee. I mean, he did it with Burns, did it with Woodruff when they first came up. They pitched out of the bullpen, and then they ended up transitioning into the starter role. So we'll see how those outings go for Tidwell. But let's get into the rundown of the series just because it was a 4-game set and there's a lot more to unpack here than usual. So in game number 1, it was everyone's favorite, the world famous Paul Blackburn versus Spencer Schwellenbach, which, always fun to watch Spencer Schwellenbach pitch against the Mets. But in the top of the second inning, Albies gets hit by a pitch, steals second. Sean Murphy ends up getting a single, and then Michael Harris with a sac fly, which makes it 1-0 for Atlanta. In the top of the third inning, Acuna hits a solo shot to make it 2-0, which he ended up rounding the bases in a cocky way and caused people to get pissed off at that. So just thought I would highlight that because it's something that people kept bringing up. Olsen then with a double. Ozuna walks and a wild pitch moves the runners over. Austin Riley walks. Murphy with a sac fly, which made it 3-0 for the Braves. In the bottom of the sixth, Beatty singles. Lindor hits into a double play, but they finally show life as Brandon Nimmo walks. Soto with a 2-run shot makes it a 3-2 ball game. In the top of the seventh, Stanek works into trouble, gets out of it with 3 strikeouts. And then the bottom of the eighth, with 2 outs, the Mets get 2-1, but fail to score as they drop game number 1 of the series, continuing the losing ways. In game number 2, it would be similar, as it was Frankie Montas making his Mets debut versus Spencer Strider. And it sucks because Montas did show actually, more than we thought he probably would based on the rehab starts, because he worked into some early trouble, getting some base runners on in the first, got out of it. And in the third inning too, he had a little bit of trouble. It was the third or the fourth, but either way, had a bit of trouble one of those innings, worked out of it and did a good job giving 5 scoreless, keeping the Mets in the game. And the Mets actually took a lead too, which is what's even more annoying because Soto walks, steals a bag, Alonso with a single, Marte walks, McNeil with a sac fly to make it 1-0, Torrens walks, and then Beatty with a single to make it 3-0. But then in the top of the 6th inning, this might be the longest amount of notes that we have for an inning because it was just complete and utter chaos and a complete and utter shit show from the Mets as Braziban comes in, walks 3 batters, then a sac fly from Albies makes it 3-1. Castillo comes in, and it would be the last time we saw him in a Mets uniform, which I'm thankful for. He allows a single to Eli White, who makes it 3-2. He hits Harris. Allen gets a single to tie the game up. Reed Garrett comes in. He has been the fireman all year, and it sucked to have to bring him in the 6th, but unfortunately he was not doing a good job at the fireman role there. And it ends up being 5-3 as Olsen ends up getting a single to make it 5-3. In the 8th inning, Acuna walks. Olsen doubles to make it 6-3. Ozuna walks, and then Nunez comes into the game. He allows a double to Riley to make it 7-3. The Mets would tease, but not please in the bottom of the 9th inning as McNeil gets a double. Young with a single. Mauricio double makes it 7-4. But the top of the order, unfortunately, does not end up coming through. But the Mets would come through in game number 3 as you had Clay Holmes on the mound versus Fontes. I don't know if I'm saying his last name right, and I don't even remember his first name, but we're going to roll with it.
Fontes, I guess.
Yeah, sure. Why not? Either way, the kid's younger than both you and I, and I don't even remember his first name. I got to be honest with you. So the Mets should have beat up on him, and they did, thankfully, as there was a nice tone set early in this game. And again, like I've said in my post game, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but Clay Holmes throws inside on the first pitch of the game, but throws it towards Acuna. And that kind of set the tone. And then McNeil robbing Ozuna at the wall really set the Mets up potentially to kind of have a fire under them compared to what we've seen where they've been either playing from behind or just blowing these games outright. But either way, in the bottom of the third, Mauricio with a solo shot to make it a 1-0 game. Baldwin would tie the game up at 1, though, in the top of the 4th with a home run. In the bottom of the 4th, Soto with a solo shot to make it 2-1. Alonso gets hit by a pitch. McNeil doubles. Marte with a sac fly to make it 3-0. Beatty with a single to make it 4-1. Mauricio with a single. Senja with a single. And then Lindor with a sac fly to make it 5-1. Nimmo with a single to make it 6-1. Ignore the typo. And then in the bottom of the 7th, Soto with a solo home run to make it 7-1. He was on fire. And in the 9th inning, unfortunately, a rough debut for Pintaro, who ends up not looking too sharp at all. Forced Edwin Diaz to come into the game with 2 outs, but he gets the job done to end it. And thankfully, the Mets did not need really to ask for too much work from Edwin Diaz in the 3rd game, as They were really sharp in this game. It sucks though that he's probably going to be unavailable. Either way, though, it was Griffin Canning versus Grant Holmes in the top of the third on a Nick Allen ground out. That is where Griffin Canning unfortunately tore his Achilles and he is done for the season. Like Ian Rappaport tweeted, you don't need to be a doctor to know what happened on that play. You clearly saw the Achilles pop on it. And the fact that he was not able to put weight at all on his left foot told you all that you need to know. Hopefully, a speedy recovery for Griffin Canning, as just again, very unfortunate injury there. And then the Mets would end up coming through for him, though, as in the bottom of the fourth, Soto walks, Alonso with a single, Taylor with a sac fly to make it 1-0. In the bottom of the fifth, Lindor and Nimmo single, Alonso gets a single to drive them in to make it 2-0. With 2 outs in the bottom of the seventh, Soto and Alonso get back-to-back hits, and McNeil would drive them in to make it 4-0. And of note, the Mets pitching staff allowed no walks in that entire ball game, showing off a vintage win that this team has been getting all year, where the pitching dominates and the offense did the bare minimum, but still did enough to get the job done. So, yeah, I've been talking way too much. I need to shut up. I'll let you jump in, though, with some of your thoughts of the series.
I mean, yeah, considering the first 2 games where they lost, those games definitely were not pretty. I mean, there were some good takeaways, not that much though, and then, kind of a lot of bad takeaways. I mean, starting with that first game, I thought Paul Blackburn was very fortunate to even, because he got through almost the 4th inning, I believe. Let me just look at his final pitch. Okay, so he almost got to the 5th inning. He pitched 4 2/3 in that game, but he got in trouble quite a lot in those early in those early couple innings. I mean, he obviously gives up the a home run, or he gives up a run in the 2nd inning, and then he ends up starting the 3rd inning, and he gets into a lot of trouble because he leads off that inning with, similar to what we saw in Atlanta when he pitched there, first batter to Ronald Acuna, and he ends up, hitting a home run to dead center. And then he gets into a ton of trouble where he ends up loading up the bases. And thankfully, I don't know how he managed to get out of it, but, he only let up one more run after loading up the bases. So, he gets out of that inning 3-0. And then, he kind of settled down a little bit after that. He kept the Mets in the game. So at least I'll give him that per se. Again, I'm not saying he was good or anything because he wasn't. And then, obviously, you look at Soto, he ends up, in the 6th inning off Spencer Schwellenbach, who again, or at least in this game, Schwellenbach was really, cutting through this lineup pretty easily. But then, like I said, Soto in that 6th inning hits the home run to left center field to cut the lead down to 3-2. And then really, the pitching did a pretty good job at holding the deficit only to 3-2. And like I said before, because Budo had a pretty good outing in that game. Stanek got into a little bit of trouble, but thankfully he was able to get through it. Garrett pitched pretty well, and then obviously Diaz, he also pitched pretty well. But really, it was just, again, it was down to the offense where they had chances late. They had an opportunity to score in the bottom of the 8th, but Soto just couldn't come through, unfortunately, and they ended up losing that game. And I'll just quickly touch on Diaz in this game. I was actually pretty surprised that Diaz looked as sharp as he did, because they mentioned on the podcast that he actually hadn't pitched since Tuesday of last week. So he was off for 6 days. And typically, like what we see from Edwin Diaz, when he doesn't get, a lot of reps within a short amount of time, when you see him his next time out there on the mound, he's pretty often, he struggles with his location. But to give credit to Diaz, he let up a couple base runners in that inning, but it was never really felt too uncomfortable, because even if Diaz does let up a couple base runners, at least when his stuff is on point, he's going to go out, he's going to go up there on the mound and and strike out those guys, and that's what he did. And unfortunately, like I said, the offense just couldn't come through that game. And then the second game, look, I know we weren't expecting much from Frankie Montas, but he went out there and he did his thing. Listen, you really couldn't ask for anything more from Montas. Like for me, at least when before the game, I was at least asking for 4 or 5 innings, only give up 2-3 runs, but he goes out there and he gives you 5 scoreless. Look, if he wasn't on a pitch limit, because of course this was his first game back, and he was on a pitch limit. If he wasn't on a pitch limit, he definitely could have pitched into the 6th inning, and maybe even if he had a quick inning in the 6th, he maybe could have even started the 7th inning. because he was pitching very well. I like this fastball, especially early on. He's getting a lot of velo on it, like we talked about in the post game. He maxed out at 97.7, so almost hitting 98 on the fastball, and I mean got a tons of swings and whiffs on it. Threw it 27 times, 18 swings, 9 whiffs. Didn't get really too many swings and whiffs on his other types of pitches, but they were still solid. His secondary stuff was decent, especially later on in the game. I thought at the start of the game, especially when he was getting into some trouble earlier on, his cutter, which he was kind of throwing a lot early in the game, he really wasn't hitting his spots too much. But like I said, as we got on later through the game, he started to get more comfortable and got more of a feel for those types of pitches. But as I mentioned before, he pitched very well. And like I said, if he didn't have a pitch limit, because I believe he got taken out where he was around 75, 80 pitches, he could have went and started the 6th inning. But it was one of those things where, he had to come out and, the bullpen came in, and unfortunately, we've trusted Brosman for most of this season. Brosman has been one of their better relievers, and unfortunately, he just didn't have it. And like I said, when you walk the bases loaded coming out of the bullpen, you're playing with fire, especially against this Braves lineup and, the top of the order. And, the Braves were able to tack on runs, and then after Brosman, Castillo came in, he couldn't stop the bleeding. And then, they had to call on Reed Garrett, and, Garrett was almost out of that inning, but, just left a fastball up to Matt Olson, and he ended up driving 2 more runs. And then, the offense just really didn't do much in that game because, typical, Mets offense where, they score runs in 1 inning and then they just don't get anything until, a late push later on. But yeah, I mean, that game sucked. And, going into the final 2 games, you're like, okay, the Mets are already down 2-0 in the series. You don't really feel great about them, recovering and, at least tying up the series. But thankfully they did. And part of it was because, and Clay Holmes wasn't perfect this outing, but he certainly did look a lot better than he did in Atlanta. I think still the concern with Clay Holmes, and, you talked about it on the post game, was, you want to still see him limit the walks. Because again, 4 walks, you don't want to see that, especially against this lineup, because if you give them opportunities, they're going to take it. And listen, I know right now there is the concern about, Clay Holmes with the fatigue and stuff, and also with the fact, we saw him being taken on the 5th inning, especially, during that Rays series. I mean, for me, like I mentioned, listen, I'm not too worried exactly, just because I think Holmes is going to hit that second wind eventually. And part of the reason why I do think he will, I think, because I do trust Hefner. I do trust the pitching lab. I think they're going to put Clay Holmes in the right spot to at least, fully succeed, and for him to hit that second win. I mean, listen, ultimately it's down to him and it's down to his body on how he reacts. But I do trust that the Mets will put him in the best positioning and will handle him with the most care in order for him to be able to achieve that goal. It's just right now he's going to have to, work his way through it himself, because we talked about, obviously, Holmes hasn't been a starter since 2018. So, it's been 7 years since he started games with the Pirates, and, he hasn't worked this many innings, like I said, in 7 years. So it's going to take him some time, for his body to, recover a little bit more and, to fully adapt to this new workload. But like I said, I don't have, too much of a concern with that. But like I said, it's down to him and whether his body can do it. And obviously, Waddell came in, he pitched well. Budo, again, who, he's starting to look a bit more decent, a bit more reliable, which is much needed considering how taxed his bullpen is. Budo came in, he looked solid. Stanek, who, looked good in that game and then looked good yesterday, he's starting to maybe look a little bit more reliable. So possibly, he could maybe go back into the circle of trust at some point, hopefully. And then, like you mentioned, Pintaro, he had the chance to close it out. It was his major league debut. So I don't want to get too much on the kid, but, you really didn't want to use Diaz in that situation. And I thought after he struck out Nick Allen, I thought he kind of got into a groove, but then just gave up a couple base hits, burned 2 runs. So, of course, you have to let in Diaz because you don't want to let that game get out of hand. And, Diaz did his thing. Got out of that game, and the Mets ended up winning. And then, like I mentioned before, Soto had that very good game, 2 home runs. And, Soto is making a late push for the All-Star game, I'll tell you that. And, I mean, right now he's one of the finalists in right field along with Andy Pages, which he should beat out Andy Pages at least. So, hopefully, he could secure a spot in the All-Star game because he's looking a lot better. And this is the Juan Soto, that we've wanted to see because, I mean, right now he's got a 1,200 OPS in the month of June. He's hitting a ton of home runs, so he's looking very good right now. And then, yeah, that final game, like we touched upon, sucks that Canning went down, speedy recovering to him. But the biggest thing was, and like you mentioned, with the fact that the pitching staff didn't let up any walks, but the bullpen came in clutch, after Canny, because Austin Warren comes in. He gives you two and a thirds inning of just very good work. Didn't let the Braves really build up any kind of momentum. Nunez came in, and that's the Denzel Nunez that we want to see. That's the Denzel Nunez that we saw last year. He kind of started off a little bit shaky in that game, kind of let up, a couple hard base hits deep to the warning track, but after that, settled in. He ended up striking out the side in the seventh inning. His fastball was working well, his slider was working very well. I mean, 11 swings, 4 whiffs on the slider, four swings, 2 whiffs on the four seamer as well. And the big thing with Nunez is his command looks like he's finally got it under control, which that's a big thing because we're gonna need, especially with this bullpen being as beat up and as taxed as it is right now, we're gonna need guys like Denzel Nunez to come in and really insert himself into the circle of trust. So hopefully this is just the start of Nunez starting to finally look like the guy that we saw last year. And as I mentioned before, Stanek pitched well, and then Diaz pitched well again to close out that game. And then listen with the offense. Wasn't perfect, obviously, like you mentioned on the post game yesterday. 2 for 8 with runners in scoring position. You would like to see a bit more, but the big thing was the big guys came through when they needed to come through. Obviously, you had Tyrone Taylor hit a sacrifice fly earlier in the game to put him up 1-0, which is something you like to see because we know how poorly this team is with situational hitting. So you like to see that the fact that they got a sacrifice fly when they needed it. Obviously, Pete Alonso had a hit to bring it in I believe Lindor to make it 2-0, and then Jeff McNeil came in clutch late in the game, put them 4-0, and that set them on a path to end up closing out this game and winning 4-0. So yeah, I mean, listen, the series didn't start out too well, but a very nice finish to the series, and hopefully that carries into Pittsburgh because they have a chance now to go into Pittsburgh. And listen, maybe they don't sweep because Blackburn's pitching the second game, so again you don't know what you're going to get from them. But hopefully, they have an opportunity where they can go into Pittsburgh, win 2 out of 3, and now build up some momentum up until the All-Star break, which is much needed.
I don't know if I have anything else to add. I mean, you just you tackled everything there. What I will say though, I'll say that it's amazing that they're in first place after this entire debacle of the way that things have unfolded over the past 2 weeks. That's the part that's impressive the most. They got help a lot from the Phillies getting swept by the Astros, which was really nice.
Thank you to Houston.
So thank you to Houston doing a favor once again. Beat them in the World Series a few years ago, beat up on the Yankees in the championship series a lot. So gotta love the Astros for that. But yeah, it was just good to see Juan Soto, of course, the biggest thing. This was the series of Juan Soto, just hitting as many home runs as he did during this series, being the driving force of the offense as much as he was. This is what he's getting paid $800 million for, and it sucks that he had the slow start because people would not be saying a bad word about him right now, and he needs to be in the All-Star game starting June 30th. Everyone has to start voting for him. It is just, I got to say and go off on a rant about the All-Star voting system. It is so stupid that we're still doing this. The fact that the only Dodger to not make it to the final round in the All-Star voting was Michael Conforto is a complete and utter joke. And Conforto's still he was still like top 10 in voting. What are we doing here?
It just Conforto stats, not too good.
It's so stupid. Like, I get that the All-Star game is for the fans and everything, and they want to get the interaction for the fans to get the vote players in, but it's so ridiculous that you're letting guys in that, and guys like Teoscar Hernandez had no business being a finalist over James Wood. Like, how it is beyond me that James Wood was not a finalist for the All-Star game. He'll make it either way. He should be starting that game, though. I'm sorry. It is complete bullshit that Andy Pages or Teoscar Hernandez might start just because there's more Dodger fans than National fans. Not that I'm breaking news to anyone there, but I don't know what they could do to change it and make it more balanced in some regard. Bring the Electoral College, I guess, to the All-Star voting, right? I don't know. All I know is that something has to change with that because it's so dumb It is so dumb that like the fact that Mookie Betts even got more votes than CJ Abrams, really? That's fucked up. Ellie De La Cruz deserved more votes than Mookie Betts. But no, we gotta vote Mookie Betts because he's a Dodger. He's got to get in because of the name. I'm
Yeah.
sorry, but I had to go on a quick rant about that because it just bothers me so much that every single year we're having this conversation. Max Muncy should not be a finalist either.
Yeah, I don't think the electoral college is going to help either, considering California is one of the biggest states in the U.S. So
True, it doesn't
no,
even make things better.
that would make things even better for
Although
them.
they hold up, we actually just got news that Ellie De La Cruz,
Yeah, he declined.
um, yeah, he declined. I don't know. Wow, sorry, I just saw the Charlie Coyle deal.
Yeah, that's a good
Yo,
return for Colorado. They got Brindley. Ooh, that's a good return.
yeah, sorry to go hockey mode, everyone that gets pissed when we do, but busy time right now in the NHL.
Wow. Okay.
But yeah, I don't know if you wanted to expand thoughts on the All-Star voting and everything, but it just
Yeah.
bothers me.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, and this is it with every sports. You know, it's the All Star game is a popularity contest. Like I don't like for me, and like I know with like hockey and stuff, like the All Star game for me just doesn't do anything for me anymore. I know when I was a bit younger, you kind of get a little bit more excited for it, but to be honest, for me at least, the home run derby is more entertaining to watch than the actual All Star game. So, I mean, listen, it sucks at the fact, just because there's more Dodger fans, that more guys are gonna vote for them. So, it's just it is what it is. I mean, like for the Mets' sake, I mean, I expect Lindor and Soto should definitely start. I don't think Pete's gonna end up starting just because I'm Freddie Freeman statistically has had the better season than Pete, so probably Freeman should deserve the nod over Pete, but Pete is still going to end up. He's still going to make it, as a bench player, and he'll probably participate in the home run derby too, just because that's his thing. That's what he does. But yeah, I'm not really too sure how to fix that. That's. I mean, you could go through the voters, through the writers, and let them vote. But again, there's probably heavy Dodgers bias in the media too. So it's just it is what it is. I mean, the Dodgers are arguably, I mean, there's a competition with them and the Yankees. I mean, the Yankees obviously have the more historical, success compared to the Dodgers, but currently right now the Dodgers are just the most popular team in baseball, and they get the love fest. I mean, we see it with every day. I mean, how many times does the MLB account post just random Shohei Ohtani clips? Like he'll be
Oh, he
walking.
put on his batting gloves.
He'll be walking in the dugout, freaking with his thumb up his ass, and like, oh, Shohei Ohtani, look what he did.
I've never seen. Okay, timeout, because that just made me think of something. I've never seen an MLB, like I've never seen the MLB account post for anyone rehab assignment clips. Not even rehab assignment, facing hitters in simulated games until Shohei Ohtani was rehabbing and building his way up to pitch again. It's so stupid. Like, I'm sorry, and I know we're gonna come across as salty because, you wish the Mets were that good, and you wish that the Mets got that much attention. Yeah, you know what? I do, but I also think it's just stupid that they posted him doing simulated games. They've never done that for anyone else. It's just so stupid.
That is what it is.
Yeah, it is what it is right. But either way, just to talk about the series a little bit more. Like you said, another positive was Dednell Nunez really showing what he was last year. Hopefully he enters the circle of trust because he looked really good. Outside of that, I mean, you pretty much tackled my thoughts there. I don't know if I got anything else to add. I don't know if you there's anything else you want to discuss with the series, but yeah, it was just nice to see them split the series, considering the first two games started off so poorly and they desperately needed to get just wins.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could maybe talk about a little bit, and we brought this up a little bit when we did the post game after the second game. I think with Montas, like I said, I liked what I saw from him. My only, and it's not a huge concern, but it's definitely like a little concern because if you guys recall back to it was the first or whichever game Blackburn pitched in LA against the Dodgers. Blackburn looked really good, but I think part of the reason why he looked really, really good, and then you saw him when he came out of the bullpen against the Rockies. I think part of the reason why you saw that drop off, and one of the reasons why he looked that good in Colorado or in LA, was just because the fact that the adrenaline and the fact that he was pumped up because it's been a while. What he went on the IL, I believe, in August last year after that Padres series. So it had been a while that that he came and he pitched on a major league mound and in a major league game. So there was definitely he was definitely amped up and he was ready to go. And that's the only thing I want to see from Nunez. I'm not from Nunez. What I want to see from Montas. I want to see how Montas reacts to his next start. And he's going to end up pitching the series in Pittsburgh. So I definitely, and listen, I'm not asking for him to go out there and throw 5-6 scoreless innings again. But if he could go out there, give you 5-6 innings in length, because obviously I don't know if they're gonna still have him on a pitch limit. They probably will. They probably will increase it a little more. Maybe they'll increase it to 90 pitches. But I do want to see how he reacts, and I want to see him look comfortable again on the mound, and just limit and not get into too much trouble, and then just limit any type of damage if he does let up any type of run. So that's my only thing with Montas. I think he will be fine, but I just want to make sure that it wasn't just the adrenaline that got him to that first game. I do want to see how he reacts on the mound in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, which we'll see. And then the only other conversation I have in terms of a starter is just like the Clay Holmes thing, because you brought up the fatigue and stuff, which I'm definitely more concerned than I think you are in that regard, just because of the fact that where it's like I'm worried about how, like, I know that you were saying that hopefully he picks up a second win. My question is though, like, what if he doesn't? And then you're stuck with a guy that is just going to run out of gas more and more and more, which the All-Star break is going to be very important for him to get get some rest here, which now it's going to be interesting though, because like I said, they have to reconfigure their rotation entirely with this news. So I was taking the calendar out and trying to go through the gymnastics here of what the rotation might end up being now that Canning is out. So if my math is correct, or if my assumption is correct, which don't assume, makes an ass out of you and me. So I had to do that because Nick always says it. But with the off day coming up on Monday, I would assume that Clay Holmes would get pushed now to Tuesday's game. Or no, I think he was already getting Tuesday's game against Milwaukee. But either way, I think he gets that game, because that would be 5 days of rest right there. I would assume Peterson gets moved to the Wednesday game. Blackburn, who was supposed to start on the 4th of July, which, good first inning fireworks we would have got. I think he's moving to the Thursday game, which of course I have tickets for. So that's going to be fun. Friday would probably be Montas against the Yankees on the 4th. And then that lines them up to probably put Manaea in that Saturday game versus the Yankees. And then Holmes gets his regular rest then again to pitch Sunday against his former team there. That's how I'm assuming this is going to line up, because like I said, Manaea needs to make one more rehab start. So if you give him that rehab start on either tomorrow or Sunday, that would line him up to be ready to go, I would think, for Saturday against the Yankees. I could be wrong with that, but that's just what I'm guessing is the course of action they're going to go down here.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how they handle the rotation and how they exactly line it up. But I mean, just one more point to touch back on the Clay Holmes thing. I mean, listen, for me, maybe there is a chance where he doesn't pick up that second win. I don't know. I mean, listen, there is a chance, because you never know. It's down to his body. But for me, I feel that the Mets are, at least they're prepared to handle it, just because obviously if they were signing Clay Holmes and their intention, like how it ultimately played out, like their intention was to convert him to a starter. I think that I at least trust them, and to know that they would at least think ahead and to say, okay, how are you gonna, handle him, when he reaches this point of the season where, he kind of starts, to get a little bit fatigued. We have to see how his body wears out. So, like I said, for me, I think there was a plan in place. I do trust him with that, and I think they will put Clay Holmes in the best position for him, to get through this outing or through this stretch of, fatigue where he's going through right now. But ultimately, like I said, like you said, it's down to Clay Holmes and his body, because you can put him in the best position, but if his body is not cooperating, then there's not much you can do. But I do think they're fully prepared, and they were thinking ahead. When they signed Clay Holmes initially, to say like, okay, there is going to be a point where fatigue is going to catch up to him, because look, it happens with every starter, that converts into, or happens with every reliever that probably converts into a starter. I'm sure Michael King went through this last year in San Diego. Seth Lugo, when he was converting, into a starter, I'm sure he kind of went through a little fatigue period. So, but like I said, it's going to be down to him, but ultimately, I trust that this coaching staff, at least on the pitching side, knows what they're doing, and they're going to put Holmes in the best position for him to get through this period.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see if the All-Star break, like I keep saying, helps. I think that's, again, the biggest thing, because then with Holmes, just to continue the schedule here going forward to see where his next start would be for the All-Star break, he would probably get that Saturday game then. No, he would get Sunday. He would get the last game before the All-Star break, it looks like. So, I don't know how they would line up the rotation after it. I would hope that they just keep the rotation the same then at that point, because my thing that I've been saying is let Holmes get as much rest as he possibly could. Give him one of those starts against the Angels. That's what I would do. But either way, let's preview the series that's coming up, even though the graphic's a little incomplete because the Pirates, since I made this graphic, announced their starters, which, again, they waited until too close to showtime for me to do this one. But for game one, Mitch Keller versus David Peterson. Mitch Keller, 1-10 on the year, which goes to show you, because he's not even pitching bad, to a 4.02 ERA and a 1.22 whip. The Pirates offense is that bad that he is 1-10 on the year, despite having relatively solid numbers for like a middle rotation number 5 type guy. David Peterson, 5-3 on the year, 2.98 ERA and a 1.24 whip. And for the guys that they announced, Bailey Falter will be getting that game 2 for the Pirates. He's 6-3 on the year with a 3.59 ERA and a 1.18 whip, versus the great Paul Blackburn, who's 0-2 on the year with a 6.62 ERA and a 1.75 whip. And then game number 3, it is going to be Mike Burrows, who is 1-2 with a 4.45 ERA and a 1.32 whip, versus Frankie Montas, who is 0-0 on the year, a 0 ERA and a 1.20 whip, making his second start of the season. All I could say is that you got to take 2 out of 3 bare minimum against this team. The Pirates offense is a complete and utter joke. And the Mets pitching, which is hopefully getting back on track, you'd love to see if they could go out there and dominate, keep the lineup in the games. You avoid Paul Skeens. So to me, there's really no excuse to not at least take 2 out of 3. I want to sweep, but with Paul Blackburn, you never know.
Yeah, listen, if Blackburn wasn't pitching that second game, and I mean, let's say if it was Canning or Manai as an example, I would say you have to get a sweep, just because of the main reason that you're not going to face Paul Skeens. But like you said with Blackburn, you never know what you're going to get. He might pitch okay, he might pitch good, and then he might get lit up, especially against this bad and horrible Pirates lineup. So you never know. It's a coin flip, but at minimum, you have to take 2 out of 3. I'll be conservative. I'll say 2 out of 3, just because I don't know what I'm gonna get from Blackburn. So I'll say they win the first game, lose the second game, win the third game. And I mean, look, like you talked about with the Pirates having a bad offense. I mean, look, the numbers back it up, because Andrew McCutchen is currently their best hitter in OPS, and that's only a 744. So they really don't have any great hitters. I mean, O'Neal Cruz is definitely a dangerous hitter, at least with the power. I mean, 13 home runs on the year, only 715 OPS. So at least you have to worry about those two. But then, Brian Reynolds only a 675 OPS, Brian Hayes a 567 OPS. So offensively, they're not too good. Pitching wise, They're decent. They're at least decent with their starters. Bullpen, not so much. They don't have a great bullpen. So I think main thing is, you have to make sure the offense tacks on as many runs. Let's see how that is because, you never know with an Eric Chavez run offense. I mean, this could easily be like the series back in City Field where, the first two games were very close and they could have gone either way. And then the Mets, ended up being blown out in that third game. But, the offense is going to have to tack on early runs, get the pitcher, get the starter out of that inning, get to the bullpen as early as possible. And, our pitching staff's just going to have to go out there, get outs as quickly as possible. And this is an opportunity in this series, especially, minus the Paul Blackburn start. But, David Peterson, aside from that start in Philly where he just got beat up, his last couple starts, he's been given some good length. So you would hope that David Peterson could at least maybe give you 7 innings in that start, conserve the bullpen a little bit. Obviously, like I said, you don't know what you're going to get from Blackburn. And then Montas, depending, on, if they're going to have a pitch limit for him or not, he might be capable of giving you some length. So it's a good opportunity this series to rest the bullpen a little bit and let the starters, take some workload off them and for them, to go a bit deeper into games.
Yeah. You got to beat up on this Pirate staff that, again, does not have Paul Skeens going in the series. But yeah, I think that's really all we got to cover, is unless there's anything else you wanted to add. Or
no, there's really not much. I mean, like, again, speedy recovery to Griffin Canning. And I mean, also for anybody who's watching, either live or on playback, if you guys are interested in hockey talk, 6:00 tonight, we're gonna have a draft stream. We'll be over at Big Apple Hockey, so make sure you guys tune in.
And live on Ranger Central.
And live on Ranger Central as well. So yeah, we gotta plug both. So, yeah. But yeah, it should be a fun night ahead of us. So yeah, I mean, let's see what happens.
Yeah, gonna be interesting, and sorry that the stream was not the best, considering we were also getting distracted with all the all the rumors going around in the NHL world. It's hard to balance both these things around this time of year, but we're doing our best here. So thank you everyone for tuning in and watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe, turn on your notifications, and we'll see you guys in the next one.